Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming together to immerse ourselves in this wonderful, rich body of wisdom that we inherit and we add to as an ongoing legacy of ours as well. We are in Parshat Behar, which is in the book of Leviticus, chapter 25, and we will read through the English translation of our portion. And then I'll share with you a focus study, and then we'll have our collaborative conversation about it. If you'd like to go ahead at this point and unmute, together we can have an opportunity to say our blessing for this moment. Baruch
Ata Adonai Eloheinu
melech
melech haolam
asher kiddushenu
b'mitzvotav
v'tzivanu
la'asok v'divrei Torah.
Thank you, God, for the opportunity to immerse ourselves in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah. Let me share with you the opening verses of our portion, and then I'll invite others to have an opportunity to read as well. Book of Leviticus, chapter 25, verse 1. God spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai. Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when you enter the land that I assign to you, the land shall observe a Sabbath of God. 6 years you may sow your field, and 6 years you may prune your vineyard and gather in the yield. But in the 7th year, the land shall have a Sabbath of complete rest, a Sabbath of God. You shall not sow your field or prune your vineyard. We're now on verse 5 of chapter 25. Okay. And let me ask, June, would you like to read a little bit starting at verse 5?
Thank you, Rabbi. You shall not reap the aftergrowth of your harvest or gather the grapes of your untrimmed vines. It shall be a year of complete rest for the land. But you may eat whatever the land during the Sabbath will produce. You, your male and female slaves, the hired and bound laborers who live with you, and your cattle and the beasts in your land may eat all its yield. You shall count off 7 weeks of years, 7 times 7 years, so that the period of 7 weeks of years gives you a total of 49 years. Then you shall sound the horn loud. In the 7th month, on the 10th day of the month, the Day of Atonement, you shall have the horn sounded throughout your land, and you shall hallow the 50th year. You shall proclaim release throughout the land for all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you. Each of you shall return to his holding, and each of you shall return to his family.
Thank you, June. Let me invite Justin, if you'd like to continue there at verse 11.
Thank you, Rabbi. This 50th year shall be a jubilee for you. You shall not sow, nor shall you reap its aftergrowth or pick its grapes that you had set aside for yourself. For it is jubilee. It shall be holy to you. You shall eat its produce from the field. During this jubilee year, you shall return, each man to his property. And when you shall make a sale to your fellow Jew or make a purchase from the hand of your fellow Jew, you shall not wrong one another. According to the number of years after the Jubilee, you shall purchase from your fellow Jew. According to the number of years of crops, he shall sell you. The more the remaining years, you shall increase its purchase price. The fewer the remaining years, you shall decrease its purchase price. Because he is selling you a number of crops. You shall not wrong one man, his fellow Jew, and you shall fear your God, for I am the Lord your God.
Thank you so much, Justin. Mark Levinstein, would you like to read a little bit starting at verse 18?
Thank you. In this year of Jubilee, each of you shall return to his holding.
So this is verse 18.
Sorry, 18.
Yeah.
You shall observe my laws and faithfully keep my rules, that you may live upon the land in security. The land shall yield its fruit, and you shall eat your fill, and you shall live upon it in security. And should you ask, what are we to eat in the 7th year, if we may neither sow nor gather in our crops? I will ordain my blessings for you in the 6th year, so that she will yield a crop sufficient for 3 years. When you sow in the 8th year, you will still be yielding old grain of that crop. You will be eating the old until the 9th year, until its crop comes in. For the land must not be sold beyond reclaim, for the land is mine. You are but strangers resident with me. Throughout the land that you hold, you must provide for the redemption of the land.
Thank you so much. Let me invite Jay. Would you like to read a little bit starting at verse 25?
Thank you, Rabbi. If your kinsman is in straits and has to sell part of his holding, his nearest redeemer shall come and redeem what his kinsman has sold. If a man has no one to redeem for him, but prospers and acquires enough to redeem with, he shall compute the years since its sale, refund the difference to the man to whom he sold it, and return to his holding. If he lacks sufficient means to recover it, what he sold shall remain with the purchaser until the Jubilee. In the Jubilee year, it shall be released, and he shall return to his holding.
Thank you so much, Jay. And let me invite David. Susan, would you like to read this week? We're now at verse 29.
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. And should a man sell a dwelling house in a walled town, its redemption shall be till the end of the year of its sale. A year its redemption shall be, and if it is not redeemed by the time a full year has elapsed for him, the house in the town that has a wall shall pass over irreversibly to its buyer for his generations. It shall not be released in the Jubilee. And houses in the hamlets that have no walls all around shall be reckoned as part of the land's open fields. They shall have redemption and be released in the Jubilee.
As for the Levites' cities, the houses in the cities of their possession, the Levites shall have eternal redemption. And that which one from the Levites will redeem, it shall come out a sale of a house and of a city of his possession in the Jubilee year. Because of that, the houses of the Levite cities is their possession among the children of Israel. But a field of their cities surrounding land shall not be sold, because it is an eternal possession for them.
Thank you so much, both of you. Kath, would you like to continue there at verse 35?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. If your kin, being in straits, come under your authority and are held by you as though resident aliens, let them live by your side. Do not exact advance or accrued interest, but fear your God. Let your kin live by your side as such. Do not lend your money at advance interest, nor give your food at accrued interest. I, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, am your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to give you the land of Canaan to be your God.
Thank you so much, Kath. And let me invite Jim. Would you like to read a few verses starting at verse 39?
Thank you, Rabbi. If your kinsman under you continues in straits and must give himself over to you, do not subject him to the treatment of a slave. He shall remain with you as a hired or bound laborer. He shall serve with you only until the Jubilee year. Then he and his children with him shall be free of your authority. He shall go back to his family and return to his ancestral holding. For they are my servants, whom I freed from the land of Egypt. They may not give themselves over into servitude. You shall not rule over him ruthlessly. You shall fear your God. Such male and female slaves as you may have, it is from the nations round about you that you may acquire male and female slaves.
Thank you, Jim. Let me invite Robert, if you'd like to continue there at verse 45.
Yes, thank you. Moreover, the children of the strangers that do sojourn among you, of them shall ye buy. and of their families that are with you, which they begat in your land, and they shall be your possession. And you shall take them as an inheritance for your children after you, to inherit them for a possession. They shall be your bondsmen forever. But over your brethren, the children of Israel, you shall not rule one over another with rigor. And if a sojourner or stranger wax rich by thee, and thy brother that dwelleth by him wax poor, and sell himself unto the stranger or sojourner by thee, or to the stock of the stranger's family, after that he is sold, he may be redeemed again. One of his brethren may redeem him. Either his uncle or his uncle's son may redeem him, or any that is nigh of kin unto him of his family may redeem him. Or if he is able, he may redeem himself.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Let me invite Rose, would you like to read a little bit starting at verse 50? And yes, you'll need to unmute.
$50?
Yes.
Okay. Or an uncle or an uncle's son shall do the redeeming. Anyone in the family who is of the same flesh shall do the redeeming, or having prospered your formerly impoverished kin may do the redeeming. The total shall be computed with the purchaser as from the year of being given over to the other until the Jubilee year. The price of sale shall be applied to the number of years as though it were for a term as a hired laborer under the other's authority. If many years remain, your kin shall pay back for the redemption in proportion to the purchase price. And if few years remain until the Jubilee year, so it shall be computed. Payment shall be made for the redemption according to the years involved. One shall be under the other's authority as a laborer hired by the year. The other shall not rule ruthlessly in your sight. If not redeemed in any of those ways, that person, along with any children, shall go free in the Jubilee year. For it is to me that the Israelites are servants. They are my servants, whom I freed from the land of Egypt. I am your God, Hashem.
Thank you so much. And Norman, we have 2 verses left in our portion, verses 1 and 2 of chapter 26. Would you like to read those?
You may not make idols for yourselves, or set up for yourselves carved images or pillars, or place figured stones in your land to worship upon. For I, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, am your God. You shall keep my Sabbaths and venerate my sanctuary, mine Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. That's our entire Torah portion for the week. I'd like to share with you a focused study about it, and then we'll have our collaborative conversation about it. If you have a copy of the study sheet, which I've entitled The Flow of Freedom, I invite you to take it out now. And what I focus on here is some of the opening verses, which relate to what is known as the Jubilee year. And so here in number 1, I share 2 of those verses. You shall sound the shofar. You shall consecrate the 50th year. You shall proclaim liberty throughout the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. It shall be a jubilee for you, and each of you shall return to your own holding, and each of you shall return to your family. So I have 3 words that I left also in the Hebrew here, and I want to explore a little bit about the relationship among those 3 words, why I think they are key words here, and what the relationship might be. And those 3 words in Hebrew are kadosh, deror, and yovel. And the word kadosh here in its verbal sense means to consecrate, to set aside, to make holy. And deror, we'll explore more in detail in a moment. And then the word yovel, which gets pronounced as jubilee, yovel. So that one phrase there, you shall proclaim liberty throughout the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. That, of course, is a very famous phrase within American history. It's a verse that's inscribed on what's known as the Liberty Bell that is in Philadelphia. And the Liberty Bell was initially constructed in 1751 at the request of the legislature in the colony of Pennsylvania. And it was designed, we think, to commemorate the 50th anniversary of William Penn's charter providing expanse of religious freedom and rights to the citizens of Pennsylvania. And then, of course, in the 19th century, it became a symbol of the abolition movement, seeking to abolish slavery in the United States. Those who haven't read it, I really recommend a book by Bruce Feiler called, I believe it's called America's Prophet. The extent to which the story of Moses influenced and appears again and again as an iconic reference within American history. So the story about the Liberty Bell, of course, is in it, as a number of references that are made to the story of the Israelites and their search for leaving behind slavery, constrictions, and seeking to create a promise, build upon a promised land, is built into some of the early frameworks of the founding of this country. So, so these are the verses I've picked up, and I want to explore a little bit the Hebrew here. And while on the Liberty Bell, it does say, you shall proclaim liberty, we will see that the real nuance of the word deror has a sense of flow, of a streaming. And here you have here number 2, deror, a verb meaning to flow abundantly, deror as a noun, a flowing, and related to that, darom means south. So we have these translations of the word, Hebrew word deror, really having the sense of movement, not just something that has happened, but a movement and a flow and a stream. Okay. And then we have the word that gets translated, at least in my edition, as Jubilee, Yovel. And here in number 3, we have the Hebrew roots for it, Yaval, which means to conduct, bear along, carry away. Yaval, a water course or stream. Yavol, a produce of soil. Yovel is a ram's horn, and Tevel, also from the same root here, meaning world. So this notion of Yovel is also conveys this sense of like movement and a flow, of a streaming, a water course. And so I want to explore a little bit this notion about freedom, at least as it's being described within these verses about the Jubilee year, having to do with flow. And I want to explore that a little bit. We have here in number 4, several classical Jewish commentators who are kind of remarking on this word Yovel, which is kind of provocative as to what exactly it means. So one commentator, Ibn Ezra, says Yovel means sending away, as in sending away of slaves. Another, Nachmanides, says Yovel means freedom, as in freeing of the slaves. Ramban says Yovel means movement. And then Rabbeinu Bechaya, who was a 14th century Spanish Kabbalist, says Yovel means rivulet, as in during Yovel, everything flows back to its original source. So I want to pick up on what our Kabbalist here is pointing us towards, emphasizing this nuance of flow and of things flowing back to a source. And what's interesting is to explore this notion about freedom. So there are 2 biblical words that are used for freedom. One is chofshi, which means an unshackling. It's used in Exodus to describe a letting go and the liberation of slaves. And then we have this word here, deror, which has a different nuance to it. And the fact that it is part of this context of flow, and also the other key Hebrew word that I'm suggesting here is that of kadosh, that of sanctification, consecration, of holiness. So I want to explore a little bit these two different notions of freedom, and then we'll get into our art piece and a bit of poetry as well. So in philosophy, there are two classical notions of freedom, and one is defined as negative freedom, and that is having to do with being free from restraint, to be literally unshackled, which is kind of the Hofshi nuance here, to be released, to be let go. And so classical liberal philosophy, as it begins to develop in the 18th century and further, focuses on this notion about freedom from restraint, freedom from the restraints of the old order, freedom from the restraints of the remnants of feudalism, freedom from the restraints of imposed authority, and the capacity of human beings to begin to shape their own destiny. So to be let go and released from these impositions of external authority. Over the course of the next couple of centuries, this notion about to be free from something really begins to develop and produce what by the 20th century becomes known as the autonomous individual. That is, someone who has the capacity to determine for him or herself what they're going to do, what they're going to believe in, what choices they're going to make in their own life, apart from what any external authority may impose upon them. And we see that on the one hand, this is a great advance for humankind to be free from all these constraints. And I think by the end of the 20th century and into the 21st century, we're starting to see some of the dangers of this kind of complete autonomous human being, the human being who is his or her own authority, who feels freed from any external authority to tell them what to believe in, how to behave, how to live their lives, and so forth. And so I think in the 21st century, we're starting to see some of the results of a pushback against this notion of the unchained, unencumbered human being. So in the obverse side, the counterpoint to negative liberty would be positive liberty, which is the notion that one becomes one's fullest self within a framework of commitment to other human beings. And so this is the notion that one really reaches one development by being part of a group, not being separated from a group. So it's this notion of that one develops oneself and becomes released as part of a commitment to a way of life, and that's what true freedom is all about. So one way to think about the Israelites' departure from Egypt is that on one hand, it can look like this, what we've discussed as negative freedom. That is, they have been unchained. They've been released from these constraints that they've been living under for hundreds of years in Egypt. And now they are going out into the expanse that we call Babin Bar, out into the expanse and into the wilderness. And then they get to this moment at Mount Sinai, which we will be observing the holiday of Shavuot in just a week's time, which celebrates that moment of revelation at Mount Sinai. And what happens at Mount Sinai is there's this all of a sudden this understanding that the freedom is not just about getting away from the chains of slavery that Egypt represents. the purpose of that was to come to this moment of covenant, of being a sense of a people who are accountable to one another. And that's the way that a promised land will be developed and built, will be in this covenantal relationship with one another and also with the source of all of those possibilities, that which we call God. So there are these two different notions here, and we're going to be exploring these notions here. And we're going to do that a little bit by exploring our painting that I've chosen for this week, which is by Hilma af Klint. And what's interesting is I really only learned myself about Hilma af Klint in the past year or so. And she is a remarkable woman born in Sweden in the mid-19th century. She goes to the Royal Academy of Art, and she sets herself up as a portrait painter and a landscape artist. And then by the end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century, she becomes associated with the Theosophy movement, which was one of these spiritualist movements that was developing in the end of the 19th century. And the Theosophists were particularly welcoming of women. So that was a place where she could, that she could identify with, where she could grow and develop within it. And here's what's happening in the art world as she begins to establish herself as a painter. By the mid-19th century, we had these revolutionary art movements launched first by the Impressionists. And the Impressionists were the first to free themselves from the constraints of classical art, which had a very rigorous and constraining sense of the purpose of art, what were appropriate subjects for art, how those subjects were to be painted. And by and large, those rules were that you're supposed to paint reality, and if not, and you're supposed to paint reality exactly as it appears in an idealized sense. And the best subjects, most appropriate subjects for art were to be those that were nobilizing. And so themes taken from the Bible, other religious themes, themes of grand historical events, events that somehow imparted a moral message. And the Impressionists broke from these and said, well, we're going to paint reality not as you as an authority tell us to paint and what to paint. We're going to paint what we want to paint and how we experience what we're seeing, not by the rules that you're telling us to replicate that reality. So that's what the Impressionists break free of hundreds of years of rules about what's appropriate in art. And they are followed by what we'll call the post-Impressionists, such as Cézanne, who then begin to explore and break from the classical single point of perspective, which was developed in the Renaissance period. And he begins, and others begin to display on their canvases objects as seen from different points of view, all within one canvas. And then after the post-Impressionists, we get the Cubists, and the Cubists, such as Braque and Picasso and others, they begin to explode open the many planes of dimensions that every object and human being that they encounter, that they see, these multiple planes, and begin to display those on the canvas. So these are art movements that, in a sense, freed themselves from these rules of what was to be painted and how were they to be painted, in order to explore their own experience and understanding of what these realities were all about. And then, by the very beginning of the 20th 20th century, we have another group of artists who take this even further, and they begin to paint without reference to the external world at all. And this becomes known as abstract art. And for decades throughout the 20th century, it was thought by scholars that the first person to begin to really paint abstract art was Vasily Kandinsky. And he wrote a very, very beautiful book called The Spiritual in Art, in which he talks about how art is a way of encountering and beginning to express the spiritual dimension of existence. And really wasn't until, the late 20th century that some scholars began to reconsider whether Kandinsky should be considered the first abstract artist. And they encounter and they kind of rediscover Hilma af Klint, who 5 years before Kandinsky ever painted an abstract work of art was herself engaging in the painting of abstract art. And I have here one of her earliest. This is from 1907. And again, Kandinsky didn't paint his abstract works until about 1912. So af Klint was engaged through theosophy in a spiritual practice. And she wrote that she heard voices through her exercises of her spiritual practice, telling her how to paint, what to paint, how to focus, and how to display and share what she was experiencing through her meditative and spiritual practices. And this one here is called The 10 Largest. It's number 1. It's part of a series of 40 paintings that she did over a course of, she did 10 paintings over a course of 40 days. So she painted every 4 days, she was making a work of art. And in fact, she said her voice told her that she had to paint these 10 paintings exactly in 40 days. Interesting to think about the 40 days. Now, because 40 within our spiritual tradition, our Bible, is a significant number. The 40 days of the flood that Noah endured, the 40 days that Moses spends on Mount Sinai, the 40 years that the Israelites are in the wilderness. And so here, what we have are these kind of organic shapes and interesting colors, a lot of blue, a lot of pink, a lot of yellow. And for af Klimt, what was being represented here on this canvas were a series of what she called principles that on the surface seem to be in conflict with one another. What she considered to be masculine and feminine, soft and vulnerable, and others that were more closed. And for her, these principles that seem to have different identities, for her, they were all of one, not only origin, but one union. And they were all heading towards a reconstitution of themselves into a higher level of being. When I looked at that painting and I put it in the context of what's happening here in our Torah portion, this notion about that freedom is not just a release from something, but it is a flow towards something. It is a sanctification, because this is a message about what it means to be creating something that is holy. What it means to be creating a community within a promised land. That is, that the only way to do this is a commitment to one another, and that it is a commitment that doesn't remain static. It is a commitment that is ongoing, evolving, and fluid. So I'd like to share with you a poem. And this is from our poet Rumi, who is, well, let me read it to you and then we can discuss it. Everything you see has its roots in the unseen world. The forms may change, yet the essence remains the same. Every wondrous sight will vanish, every sweet word will fade. But do not be disheartened. The source they come from is eternal, growing, branching out, giving new life and new joy. Why do you weep? That source is within you, and this whole world is springing up from it. The source is full, its waters are ever flowing. Do not grieve, drink your fill. Don't think it will ever run dry. This is the endless ocean. So Hans Klimt is now considered really the pioneer of abstract art. And what the abstract artists were doing was, once they were freed from the traditional bonds of art to material reality, once they were released from the requirement to replicate recognizable material reality, they were exploring really two dimensions. One, they were exploring deep within themselves and their own psyche, and they were also exploring, perhaps most prominently displayed, that by Mark Rothko. They were exploring something that was transcendental. They were exploring the sublime and the divine. And what's interesting to think about is the extent to which those two dimensions, the deeply internal and the deeply transcendental, may in fact be flowing into one another. And perhaps that is what Rumi is reminding us of, is that the deeply internal and the deeply transcendental flow into one another and share the same source, and that it is ever flowing and that it will never run dry. And that perhaps is a message that's being contained within our Torah portion as well, is that to constitute oneself as a fulfilled human being means being part of a community that is committed to one another and that is ever flowing, engaged in a fluid process of building community and of recognizing the divinity of all of us. So with that, I'd love to know what you encounter and what you experience in the course of our reading this Torah portion. Rose, please, you have your hand up. Share with us.
Yeah, thank you, Rabbi. Yeah, I think what we'll get, the sense of this is that the Yovel and all these are that everything returns to its previous state. I think that that's really what we're talking about, is that things over those 50 years kind of drift away, and the Yovel is way, it's kind of like a tide. I think we're talking about like tides going in and out, or birds or salmon returning to their place of origin. So I think it's the reference point is a natural reference point, that humans need to stay in touch with the natural world. And we weren't meant to drift off. There's an economic and social and political aspect to all this that we talked about, that people are not supposed to live ideally in a situation of extreme economic disparity, or people being used or exploited, that that's not the way things are supposed to be. And we should be taking the natural world as our touchstone, as our example of, I think that there's an awareness that we can't live in a complete world of, Rousseau-like harmony and everything is wonderful and, it's kumbaya every day. But there's a sense that if we drift too far away from the way things, from the harmony, then that's not good. We have to come back, just like the tide goes in and out.
I,
You
I,
know,
I
that
love this.
sounds very, very new agey, but what can you say,
Well, let me just say about that, about New Agey, and then I'll call upon Robert, which is what you got me to think about, this notion about return and going back, and that one can look at the way we read this text we call Torah. We've talked in the past about how Mary Douglas, the anthropologist, reminds us that this material was originally oral, and that the way to understand an oral text is different than the way to understand and read a text that was originally written, which is that a text that was originally oral needs to be read in a circular fashion as opposed to a linear fashion. And that when one thinks about the scroll reading, the circular reading, that it is indeed always a going back to the beginning, but the spiritual practice of doing that hopefully is that when we get back to the beginning, it looks different to us because we ourselves are different from having engaged in a year of spiritual practice. And so I'm also thinking about the song by Joni Mitchell that she wrote about Woodstock. We have to get ourselves back to the garden. But of course, she was never there. She wrote a song about a place that she was never at physically. She never made it to Woodstock because of a traffic problem. So she was on her, in a sense, re-experiencing the mythology, if you will, of what Woodstock was about. And then she was living a mythology and produced a beautiful song as a result. So let me call upon Robert, and then I'll call upon others as well. Please, Robert, share with us.
Yes, thank you. And thank you again for a lovely evening. It's always a pleasure. I really appreciated Rose's comments, and mine really follow right on. I think she really hit the highs and the lows because there's a coherence in all things. And one of the things that came about as a result of looking at the art and reflecting on the art this week is it made me reflect on how different mediums require different approaches. With poetry, we have to pick exactly the right word that we want, unless you're a sloppy poet. I probably spent 15 hours on 2 pages the other day, and I'm not a great poet, but I try not to be sloppy. On the other hand, I'm looking at Revealing Brilliance. It's at Christie's. It's just a beautiful, it looks like it's a watercolor. It all flows together. And when I was thinking about this, I was thinking, Revelation is very much like this. There's some things that they're very fine point on. Like dance, I think, has to be very specific. If it's sloppy, it doesn't touch your heart. Film and photography can go both ways. You can make it very precise, or you can blur it and have beauty and meaning and so forth. And anyhow, that was an aside. But, I thought there was some practical wisdom in here. For example, the idea of living below one's means, because really they're saving. That last year, they're not saying, oh, I'm just going to eat and feast. They realize they have to put something aside. So practically, it's a lesson in what? Live below your means, trust in God, but be moderate. At most, live at your means, not beyond. And then that results in what? The protection of the family. So how many families, because that isn't a practice with economics. And I can tell you, I learned it as a child from my mother. So I learned $1 is another $1. It can be $100, it can be a penny. So, it depends what we do with it. And then that's 7-year, that 7th year where a bondsman is free, debts are freed, and it really touches on what you said, Rose. It prevents excess wealth, I think, if we were to, if that were actually practiced at that time. And then I already mentioned that the 7th through the 9th year, the wisdom in that, but also they had to practice moderation during those years, because guess what? Nothing was going to happen until that they were allowed to take in that crop. And then a respect for the land. Again, Rose touched on this. And I think the deepest understanding of respect for the land is understanding it as sacred, because it's God's artwork. I mean, all creation, I think of his artwork. Underneath it, it's his science. And so, again, that coherence, having spiritual respect for ourselves and for others, and all the goodwill that's in the Torah, if we don't include the land, then they're not one. And my understanding is God is one, all creation is one. And if we can't put things into a context of one, somehow like one humanity, for me, all humanity is one. We're just one big family. Some people would disagree with that. We have some extremists, right? But then if they look at nature and so forth, they realize that what they believe doesn't cohere with reality. Another thing that comes to my mind is, and I think this is the most important one, and Rose, you touched on it. And that is, if we have to at year 7, if I've understood the text correctly, and we have free deaths and so forth, but we have to be detached. Those extremes of wealth and poverty that we have had for a long time, and it's only getting worse. You look at these laws, if they were put in practice today in principle, well, now maybe my understanding of the text was incorrect, but I look at it and I say, that is a very good way. And of course, in the Baha'i writings, we have one of our teachings is the elimination of the extremes of wealth and poverty. You must have differences, not everybody can be the same, but you have to leave the extremes. And the thing I liked best was when you mentioned covenant, because for me, that is the essence of life. And a flower has that with the sunshine. So there you go.
That's
And
lovely.
thank you again for a lovely.
Thank you. So I want to thank you also for bringing us back to some of the actual prescriptions of the Jubilee year. And this is what you got me to think about, which is that those prescriptions are, on the one hand, telling us, even though you're going to a place called the Promised Land, things are not going to be perfect. Things are going to get disrupted. Land is going to get swapped around. I mean, I've got a perfect plan here of which tribe is going to get which bit of land, but I know that the chaos of human existence is going to mean that over the course of time, that's all going to get jumbled up. So we need to have an opportunity, which we'll call the Jubilee year, to kind of set things back in order. Now, what I started thinking about it as you were sharing, Robert, is this is something that's supposed to happen every 50 years. And I wonder, in ancient times, how many people actually lived to be 50? So it may be, I wonder how many people actually lived through an entire cycle of a Jubilee year. And so then I started thinking, wow, so what's happening here is people are being taught that although you may not live from the beginning to the end of a Jubilee cycle, you are going to live within a Jubilee cycle. And so that kind of prepares one for thinking about life in a unique way. That you're living in a life cycle that is going to return things to order, and then they will become disordered again. And then you live through a cycle that returns things to order. Well, if that's the way one is anticipating that life is going to be in the full expanse of possibilities from age 1 to 50, even if one doesn't live through an entire 50-year cycle, that may affect one's psyche about just how every day, what every day means, and how one should live one's own life within that cycle of understanding that there is, as Rose and you both mentioned, a sense of return. And then human experience teaches us so that we return, but I know I will be a different person. I know the world will be a different place when we get back to the beginning, back to Joni Mitchell's garden. And so, on the one hand, it's a return and it's a cycle, but on the other hand, it takes us to a new place, a place that we've never been to. As T.S. Eliot says, we get back to the beginning and discover it for the very first time. So thank you for both for bringing all that material together. Others who would like to share? Yes, Richard.
Yes, I'd like to respond to what you say, Rabbi. And this is from today's portion, Haftorah portion, and I'll just read it. It's just a couple paragraphs. And it's Jeremiah talking to God. You freed your people from the land of Egypt with signs and marvels, with a strong hand and an outstretched arm and great terror. You gave them this land which you had sworn to their fathers to give them, a land flowing with milk and honey. And they came and took possession of it, but they did not listen to you or follow your teaching. They did nothing of what you commanded to them. Therefore, you have caused all this misfortune to befall them. Here are the siege mounds raised against the city to storm it, and the city, because of sword and famine and pestilence, is at the mercy of the Chaldeans who are attacking it. What you threatened has come to pass, as you see. Yet you, Lord God, said to me, buy the land for money and call in right witnesses when the city is at the mercy of the Chaldeans. Then the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah. Behold, I am the Lord, the God of all flesh. Is anything too wondrous for me? Which I take to mean you ain't seen nothing yet.
Thank you, Richard. And as a way to begin to cohere all this together, we talk about this journey, and this material reminds me that what Torah is describing is more like a cyclical journey, but also a progressively cyclical journey in a sense. Because the story that's in the Jewish Bible is one of displacement, settlement, exile, return, exile, return, exile, and then the entire Jewish Bible ends with a question mark in a sense of, then what? Will it be exile or will it be return? And so it's a sacred piece of literature that's not just telling us about events that have happened, but is trying to prepare us about how to live in a way that allows us to live through all the complexities, irresolution, and upheaval that is part of the external world. And it's reminding us that that externality exists within each one of us as well, and how to live through these moments of constant upheaval and constant settlement, and that it is a flow of which we're all a part, and to understand that that we're in that flow, and that flow comes from the source of all existence, is a way to set our psyche and our psychology and our spiritual dimension into a way that truly experiences a sense of shalom, of fulfillment, and of peace. And so I want to thank each and every one of you for being part of that flow, part of that journey. And I want to call on Anna as well. Okay, thank you.
I just been sitting here thinking about, we're talking about coming back, circling around, but we never come to that same place. I think of it like the icy snow cones that you used to get at the circus or something. You turn that upside down and you start winding a string around it, and it becomes a spiral. And so I think we're always moving. We come back to that point where we can see, but we're moving past it. And then you were talking about Yovel. And that's the ram's horn, and that's how ram's horns kind of go too, in a spiral. I like that.
And when and the ram's horn becomes the instrument that we blow through in order to summon us to this moment when we declare Jubilee on Yom Kippur in the 50th year. And so that summoning through that, the flow through the ram's horn reminds us of a sense of return, a return as a new person to an old place that's a new place. And once again, I want to thank everyone.
We
Yes.
all have new places to go. Look, this Afklint, you said she was Swedish?
Swedish, yes.
That's pretty far north, and there's not a lot of light there. And this picture that she painted is very tropical in appearance. It's very, it doesn't have sharp shadows. It's all kind of a mono color presentation. It's floral. It's like honeysuckle and roses. It smells sweet. It's for just a big generalization for someone who lives sort of up there where it's cold and dark. It's a pretty awesome journey. I think we can all go on journeys. I bet you each one of us we could paint a picture that is like something we've never done before and get ourselves along. Be fun.
And I think that everyone who's part of this beautiful community of readers and interpreters and commentators is making those kind of paintings in one way or another.
Yeah.
So thank you all very much for the art that you bring to all of our lives. I look forward to our regathering. God bless you all. Look forward to our next time together. Be well, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Everyone,
Good night.
thank you, everybody.